The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Buckingham Palace as tourists gathered behind the metal barriers. Among them stood 12-year-old Oliver Martinez, his dark eyes wide with excitement as he watched the stoic royal guards in their iconic red tunics and tall black hats. His mother Maria held his hand tightly while adjusting her camera strap. "Remember what I told you, Oliver," she whispered. "The guards cannot move or speak while they're on duty. It's their job to stay perfectly still." Oliver nodded, but his attention was already captured by the guard standing nearest to them. The man was tall and imposing, his rifle held at attention, his face expressionless beneath the shadow of his bearskin hat. Something about his rigid posture reminded Oliver of his father, who had served in the military before his deployment. Overseas, the crowd around them buzzed with excitement. Tourists snapped photos, children pointed and giggled, and several people tried unsuccessfully to get reactions from the motionless sentries. Oliver watched it all with fascination, but he noticed something others seemed to miss. The guard's breathing had changed. It was subtle, almost imperceptible. But Oliver had learned to read these signs during his father's difficult nights when he returned from service. The steady, controlled breaths had become slightly irregular, and there was a barely visible tremor. In the man's gloved hands, Ma'am Oliver tugged at his mother's sleeve, but she was busy trying to get the perfect shot with her camera. "Just a moment, love," she replied. Adjusting the zoom lens, Oliver looked back at the guard and saw what made his heart skip a beat. A single bead of sweat had appeared on the man's forehead, despite the cool London morning. The boy had seen this before. His father had experienced similar moments during his recovery. When the weight of memories became too heavy to bear alone, the tourists continued their chatter, unaware that the man they were photographing was fighting an invisible battle. Oliver recognized the signs of someone struggling to maintain composure while something inside them was falling apart. Without thinking, the boy stepped closer to the barrier. His mother was still distracted, comparing photos with another tourist. When Oliver noticed the guard's chest rising and falling more rapidly, the man's knuckles had turned white as he gripped his rifle, and his jaw was clenched so tightly that Oliver could see the muscle tension even from several feet away. "Please, ma'am," Oliver whispered more urgently. But his mother was now engaged in conversation with a family from Germany, helping them pose for their own photos. The guard's condition was worsening. Oliver had witnessed his father's panic attacks enough times to recognize the warning signs. The steady facade was beginning to crack, and Oliver knew that, in a matter of minutes, this proud soldier might collapse in front of hundreds of strangers. The boy looked around desperately. The other tourists were oblivious, treating the guards like living statues rather than human beings. Security personnel were positioned at various points. They were focused on crowd control and potential threats, not on monitoring the well-being of their own guards. Oliver's mind raced back to the techniques his family had learned during his father's treatment. The importance of human connection, of letting someone know they weren't alone, of providing a lifeline when the darkness threatened to overwhelm. He could see the guard's lips had gone pale, and there was now a slight sway in his previously rock-solid stance. Time was running out, and Oliver realized that no one else was going to help. The adults around him were too busy with their cameras and conversations to notice that a fellow human being was in distress, making a decision that would change everything. Oliver took a deep breath and prepared to act on the compassion his father had taught him, that sometimes breaking the rules was the most important thing you could do. Oliver slipped away from his mother's side while she was still chatting with the German tourists. His small frame allowed him to weave between the adults gathered at the barriers, all of whom were focused on taking the perfect photograph of the motionless guards. As he moved closer, Oliver could see the guard more clearly. The man appeared to be in his 20s, with fair skin that had now taken on an alarming pallor. His breathing was becoming more labored, and Oliver noticed that his eyes, though staring straight ahead as required by protocol, had a distant, haunted quality that reminded him painfully of his father's worst days. The boy remembered sitting with his father during those dark nights, when nightmares would wake the entire household and leave the strong man trembling like a leaf. His mother had taught Oliver then that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was simply Be present for someone who is drowning in their own mind. You okay? Oliver whispered softly, positioning himself directly in the guard's line of sight, but speaking just loud enough for the man to hear. The guard's eyes flickered almost imperceptibly, acknowledging the boy's presence, but his training kept him from responding. However, Oliver could see something change in those eyes, a spark of recognition, perhaps relief that someone had noticed his struggle. I know you can't talk, Oliver continued in his gentle voice, glancing around to make sure no security personnel were watching. My dad was a soldier too. Used to get scared sometimes even after he came home. The guard's breathing seemed to slow slightly, though he remained perfectly still. Oliver took this as encouragement to continue. Dad taught me that it's okay to be scared. He said that being brave doesn't mean you never get frightened. It means you keep going even when you are frightened. Oliver's voice carried the wisdom of a child who had grown up too quickly, shaped by circumstances beyond his years. A small crowd had gathered nearby, but they were focused on a changing of the guard ceremony happening at another post. Oliver realized he had a few precious minutes before someone might notice him talking to the sentry. You don't have to be alone, Oliver said softly. I'm going to stay right here with you, okay? Just so you know, someone sees you, not just the uniform, but you. The guard's eyes moved almost imperceptibly toward Oliver, and for just a moment, the boy saw a flash of gratitude before the soldier's gaze returned to its prescribed forward position. The slight acknowledgement was enough to encourage Oliver to continue his quiet vigil. My dad says that when things get really bad, you should focus on something real, something you can see or hear or feel. Oliver looked around thoughtfully. Can you hear those pigeons? They're making quite a racket. Over by the fountain, there's a little girl over there laughing because her ice cream is melting faster than she can eat it. As Oliver spoke, describing the ordinary, beautiful chaos of life happening around them, he noticed the guard's grip on his rifle beginning to relax slightly. The tremor in his hands was becoming less pronounced, and his breathing was starting to find a more natural rhythm. That's it, Oliver whispered encouragingly. You're doing great. Dad always said that panic feels like it will last forever, but it never does. It always passes. The boy continued his gentle commentary, describing the tourists, the pigeons, the changing patterns of clouds overhead, anything to anchor the guard to the present moment and help him fight through whatever memories or fears were threatening to overwhelm him. Oliver didn't know that his simple act of human kindness was about to create ripples that would extend far beyond this moment, touching lives in ways he could never imagine. The guard's name was James Fletcher, though Oliver wouldn't learn this until much later. At 24, James had served 2 tours of duty before joining the household division. Drawn by the honor and prestige of protecting the royal family, what he hadn't anticipated was how the rigid stillness of ceremonial duty would sometimes trap him with his own thoughts. Standing motionless for hours at a time gave James's mind too much freedom to wander into dark territories, memories of explosions, fallen comrades, and split-second decisions that haunted his dreams. The irony wasn't lost on him that he felt more vulnerable standing guard at a peaceful palace than he ever had on active duty overseas. As Oliver continued his quiet monologue, James found himself focusing on the boy's voice rather than the familiar, the spiral of anxiety that had been building in his chest. The child's words weren't just noise, they were a lifeline, pulling him back from the edge of a panic attack that could have ended his career and humiliated him in front of hundreds of tourists. My mom makes the best fish and chips, Oliver was saying, his young voice filled with warmth. She always burns them a little bit, but Dad says that's what makes them special. Do you have a favorite food? I bet it's something your mom made for you, too. James's thoughts shifted to his own mother's Sunday roasts. The way the house would smell like herbs and comfort, the sound of his family's laughter echoing through the kitchen. The memory was so vivid and warming that he felt the tight knot in his chest beginning to loosen. Oliver. Maria's voice cut through the moment as she finally noticed her son had wandered away. What are you doing over there? The boy turned to see his mother approaching, her expression a mixture of concern and embarrassment. Several other tourists had now noticed the interaction, and Oliver could see a security guard beginning to move in their direction. I was just talking to him, ma'am, Oliver said simply. He looked sad. Maria reached her son and gently took his hand. offering an apologetic smile to the guard who, despite his training, couldn't help but feel a pang of loss as the boy was led away. The connection, brief as it had been, had pulled James back from a dangerous precipice. "You can't disturb the guards, love," Maria explained, as they walked back toward the main group of tourists. "They have an important job to do." "No, ma'am," but he was scared, just like Dad gets sometimes. Maria stopped walking and knelt down to her son's eye level, her expression softening as she understood what had motivated his actions. She looked back at the guard, who had returned to his perfect stillness, and saw something in his posture that she recognized: the fragile composure of someone fighting battles that others couldn't see. The security guard who had been approaching slowed his pace as he observed the scene. Something about the boy's obvious concern and the subtle change in the guard's demeanor made him pause. Instead of intervening immediately, he decided to watch and wait. James stood at his post, feeling more centered than he had in weeks. The boy's simple act of recognition, seeing him as a person rather than just a ceremonial figure, had reminded him that he wasn't alone with his struggles. There were people in the world who understood, who cared, who would take the time to offer comfort to a stranger. As the morning progressed, James found that Oliver's words continued to echo in his mind, providing an anchor whenever his thoughts began to drift toward darker territories. The boy had given him something precious, the reminder that human connection could bridge any divide, even the invisible barriers created by duty and protocol. Meanwhile, Oliver kept glancing back at the guard as his mother led him through the rest of their palace tour, hoping that his new friend was feeling better. The boy didn't know that his compassionate act had been observed by more than just tourists and security personnel. Colonel Margaret Thornton had been observing the morning's activities from her office window overlooking the courtyard when she noticed the unusual interaction between the young boy and one of her guards. As commanding officer of the palace security detail, she had seen countless tourists attempt to get reactions from the guards. But this was different. Through her binoculars, she watched as the child's presence seemed to calm rather than distract the sentry. She had been monitoring Guard Fletcher's performance with growing concern over the past several weeks, noting signs of stress that reminded her of soldiers she had known who were struggling with post-deployment adjustment. When the boy was led away by his mother, Colonel Thornton made a decision that would change protocol forever. She picked up her phone and made a call that would bring Oliver and James together again. But under very different circumstances. An hour later, as the Martinez family was finishing their tour and preparing to leave, they were approached by a woman in military uniform whose bearing commanded immediate respect. "Excuse me," Colonel Thornton said, introducing herself with a warm smile. "I believe your son Oliver spoke with one of our guards this morning." Maria's face flushed with embarrassment. "I'm so sorry if he caused any trouble. He didn't mean any harm." On the contrary, the colonel interrupted gently. "Your son may have prevented a serious incident. Would it be possible for me to speak with him privately for a moment?" Oliver looked up at the impressive woman with curious eyes, unafraid despite her authoritative presence. Something in her expression reminded him of the kind doctors who had helped his father. "You're not in trouble, young man," Colonel Thornton assured him as they stepped aside. "In fact, I wanted to thank you. Can you tell me why you decided to talk to the guard?" Oliver considered the question seriously. He looked like my dad does sometimes, when the memories get too heavy and he can't breathe properly. "I mean that sometimes people just need to know someone sees them." The colonel nodded thoughtfully. "Your father was a soldier." "Yes, ma'am. He served in Afghanistan. It's better now, but it took time and lots of people helping him." "And you thought our guard needed help too?" I could see it in his eyes. "Is the same scared look Dad gets sometimes?" I just wanted him to know he wasn't alone. Colonel Thornton felt a warmth spread through her chest. In her 25 years of military service, she had rarely encountered such wisdom from someone so young. More importantly, she recognized an opportunity to address a growing problem within her ranks. "Oliver, would you and your family be willing to come back tomorrow? I'd like you to meet Guard Fletcher properly when he's off duty, and perhaps you could help us with something very important." The boy's eyes lit up with curiosity and excitement. "What kind of help?" "We have several guards who, like your father, sometimes struggle with difficult memories from their service. I think they could benefit from meeting someone who understands what they're going through. Maria, who had been listening from a respectful distance, stepped forward. If there's anything we can do to help, we're happy to contribute. Oliver's father volunteers with veteran support groups back home in Manchester. Perfect. Colonel Thornton smiled. I think you'll find that kindness, even from unexpected sources, can be more powerful than any official intervention. That evening, James Fletcher sat in his small apartment, still thinking about the boy who had noticed his struggle and cared enough to help. For the first time in months, he didn't feel alone with his challenges. He had no idea that his moment of vulnerability would soon lead to something that would help not just him, but many others who wore the uniform while carrying invisible wounds. As Oliver fell asleep that night, he dreamed not of palace guards and tourist attractions, but of his father's smile on the day the nightmares finally stopped coming. He didn't know that his simple act of compassion was about to create ripples that would spread far beyond anything he could imagine. The next morning brought unexpected nervousness for Oliver as he and his family returned to Buckingham Palace. This time, instead of joining the crowds of tourists, they were escorted through a side entrance by Colonel Thornton herself. You two know, the colonel explained, as they walked through corridors normally off-limits to the public, that what happened yesterday has opened up an important conversation among our leadership. We've been looking for ways to better support our guards who are dealing with post-service challenges. They entered a comfortable room where James Fletcher sat waiting, no longer in his ceremonial uniform but wearing civilian clothes that made him look younger and more approachable. When he saw Oliver, his face broke into a genuine smile, the first real smile he'd worn in weeks. "You're the young man who saved my morning yesterday," James said, extending his hand to Oliver with formal courtesy. Oliver shook the offered hand solemnly. "Are you feeling better today?" The directness of the question surprised James, but he appreciated its honesty. "It's much better, thanks to you. I wanted to explain what happened yesterday and to thank you properly." As they sat together, James shared his story in terms that Oliver could understand, describing how sometimes the memories from his military service would suddenly feel very real and frightening, even when he was somewhere completely safe. "It's like your mind forgets where you really are," James explained. "Yesterday, I was starting to feel like I was back in a dangerous place, instead of here at the palace. But when you started talking to me about ordinary things, pigeons, and ice cream and your mum's cooking, it helped me remember where I really was." Oliver nodded thoughtfully. "Dad says his mind plays tricks on him sometimes too, but he's learned ways to make it stop." "That's exactly what I need to learn," James admitted. "And Colonel Thornton thinks you and your family might be able to help us figure out how to help other guards who have the same problem." Maria, who had been listening quietly, spoke up. "Oliver's father leads support groups for veterans. We've learned that sometimes the most helpful thing is just knowing you're not alone, and that other people understand what you're going through." Colonel Thornton leaned forward. "We've identified several guards who might benefit from this kind of support. The question is how to provide it without compromising their dignity or their careers." Over the next hour, they developed a plan that was both simple and revolutionary. Rather than formal therapy sessions or official interventions that might stigmatize struggling guards, they would create informal opportunities for connection and understanding. Oliver's father, David Martinez, would be invited to share his recovery journey with interested guards during off-duty hours. Families of veterans would be welcomed for special tours that allowed natural interactions between guards and people who understood their challenges. The most powerful part of yesterday, James reflected, wasn't just that Oliver noticed I was struggling, was that he treated me like a normal person who happened to need help, not like someone who was broken or weak. "That's because you're not broken or weak," Oliver said with the matter-of-fact wisdom that had impressed everyone who met him. "You're just dealing with something hard, and everybody needs help with hard things sometimes." As their meeting concluded, Colonel Thornton made an announcement that surprised everyone, including James. "Guard Fletcher, I'm recommending you for a new position, liaison for veteran support services within the Palace Guard. Your experience and perspective could help us identify and assist other guards who might be struggling." James felt a surge of purpose he hadn't experienced in months. The idea that his own challenges could be transformed into a way to help others filled him with renewed hope and motivation. "There's one more thing," Colonel Thornton added with a smile. "We'd like to invite the Martinez family to become official friends of the Palace Guard. Oliver, would you be willing to write letters to guards who might be having difficult days?" Oliver's face lit up with excitement and responsibility. "Can I tell them about my dad's recovery? Maybe share some of the things that help him feel better?"
No.
"I think that would be perfect," James said, feeling grateful for the chain of events that had brought this remarkable boy into his life. 6 months later, Oliver sat at his desk in Manchester, carefully writing another letter to a palace guard who had requested correspondence through the program that had grown far beyond anyone's initial expectations. What had started as a simple act of kindness had evolved into a formal support network that was now being studied and replicated by military organizations around the world, the Guardian Angel program. As it had come to be known, paired struggling service members with families who had successfully navigated similar challenges. Oliver's letters, filled with the hopeful perspective of a child who had watched his father overcome his darkest moments, had become legendary among the palace guards. "Dear Thomas," Oliver wrote in his careful handwriting, "I heard from Colonel Thornton that you've been having some tough days lately. My dad wanted me to tell you that the tough days don't last, but tough people do. He says that all the time now, especially when he's helping other veterans who are just starting their healing journey." James Fletcher, now thriving in his role as Veteran Support Liaison, had become one of Oliver's regular correspondents. His transformation from a struggling guard to a confident advocate for mental health support had inspired many of his colleagues to seek help when they needed it. The program had expanded to include monthly video calls where Oliver and his father would speak with groups of guards, sharing practical coping strategies, and more importantly, hope. David Martinez had even been invited to speak at military conferences about the unexpected effectiveness of peer support from veteran families. "The beautiful thing about what Oliver started," James had said during one such conference, "is that it reminded us that healing doesn't always come from official channels. Sometimes it comes from a 12-year-old boy who simply recognized that someone needed help and decided to provide it." Colonel Thornton had been promoted partly based on the success of the Guardian Angel program, which had reduced stress-related incidents among the palace guards by nearly 60%. More importantly, it had created a culture where seeking help was seen as a sign of strength rather than weakness. Oliver's mother often marveled at how her son's natural empathy had grown into something that was now helping people across the globe. Letters arrived from soldiers, police officers, and emergency responders who had heard about the program and wanted to connect with families who understood their challenges. "Mum," Oliver said, looking up from his latest letter, "do you think Dad would have gotten better faster if he'd had letters from someone like me when he was struggling?" Maria considered the question thoughtfully. "I think he might have love, but more importantly, I think having someone like you write to him would have helped him feel less alone. And sometimes feeling less alone is the first step toward getting better." The boy nodded and returned to his letter. "Thomas, I also wanted to tell you that it's okay to feel scared sometimes. Dad says that courage isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing what you need to do, even when you are afraid. You're already showing courage by asking for help and by keeping going even when things are hard." That evening, as the Martinez family sat down for dinner, David read aloud from a thank you note that had arrived from a guard's mother whose son had been helped by the program. "She says her son hasn't had a panic attack in 2 months. David reported, and that he credits Oliver's letters with helping him remember that he's not defined by his struggles. Oliver smiled quietly, remembering that morning at the palace, when he had simply seen someone who needed help and decided to provide it. He had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness could grow into something much larger than anyone could have imagined. As he prepared for bed that night, Oliver thought about all the guards who would stand watch that evening, protecting important people and places. He hoped that if any of them felt scared or alone, they would remember that somewhere in Manchester, a boy who understood their struggles was thinking of them and believing in their strength. The ripples from one moment of compassion continued to to spread touching lives in ways that prove the power of human connection to heal, inspire, and transform both individuals and institutions. Oliver's swift motion to help had indeed made the royal guard drop his weapon, not literally, but metaphorically, as James and countless others learned to lay down the heavy burden of carrying their struggles alone.